Hello. Hi, everyone. This is the final plenary session before the end. So I think we're going to dive in. We're already a few minutes late, and some people have to run to trains and planes. And so thank you very much. This is a panel on funding the future of justice, investing in people-centered transformation. It's the money panel. No one likes to talk about money. It only has to be awkward if we want to. My name's Adrian Giovanni. I'm with the International Development Research Centre Canada. So we are a funder. We're part of Canada's overseas assistance, Crown Corporation. We've been around since 1970. I lead a body of work on democracy in different countries around the world. And so the question of financing has really been on our mind because we've had a huge growth in need out there in the world in recent years and a drastic decline in funding. And so we've been thinking about new and creative ways to try to bring together different funders at a global level to take what little or less we have to hopefully continue to have some impact, larger impact. And so I think that's why I'm here today, because I think a reflection from our preparations earlier, this is not the stuff we thought we would necessarily be talking about years ago, sort of early career or starting out in law school. But really then there's an importance to it, and we heard it at earlier in the very nice discussion with just before lunch with the Minister Fraser. But there's also a power to it. And so this is going to be really, we're hoping the start of a discussion on what financing means for people-centered justice in Canada. And just a couple of insights before I turn it over to our panelists. One thing that, finding new ways to come together, collaborate funding, in our experience of convening funders, and we've done it a few times where we called up all the American foundations, European foundations, large government, bilateral donors, we got people together in a room. This is not easy work, changing how we do things. And this is really about thinking about changing not just the way the justice system works, but the funding side of things. But the other thing is don't wait. It's very easy to think, when will it come? Or thinking that let's just wait for the right moment to come together. And the kind of lesson we've tried to identify and internalize is just find the opportunities and go with it. So the larger thing is the answer is in the room with the Action Committee, with everyone here. And so hopefully that's the conversation, at least we're hoping to have. So our panel is going to be in really 3 parts. First part is we're going to hear from Marcus Manuel from ODI, who's going to introduce himself, who's just going to give us a quick and brilliant download on some funding trends globally of people-centered justice, access to justice, just to give us a kind of larger panorama to situate this discussion. Then we're going to go to our 3 panelists, who again, we'll get to introductions when they speak, who are going to talk a bit about how they have been funding justice and what that looks like. And then a third part, and we should have time, is hopefully a larger conversation about what does the future look like? Where do we go together? And a kind of, so the panelists can hear from you, but also to share some insights too. So that's our roadmap. I'm going to go to Marcus right away to jump in, and thank you very much. This is Marcus Manuel from ODI Global, which is a British think tank thinking a lot about international development assistance. And Marcus has had a long, distinguished career advising government and pushing ahead thinking on justice financing in recent years. Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you very much, Adrian, and it's a real privilege to be here. I thought today, rather than telling you that justice is underfunded, which is probably not news to many of you, it is the case across the world. This is a problem. I thought it might be more interesting to say, how did one sector, not justice, the health sector, get out of that problem? Because the health sector faced an enormous gap in terms of child mortality 40 years ago. It also faced a fiscal crisis. There wasn't any money. So the question is, how did it manage to get out of it? And I just want to give a snapshot of 4 lessons that I think might help as the justice sector thinks through. The ODI Global does a lot of work on public financial management, and we've been working recently on justice and really puzzled why justice doesn't do things that are really basic in some other sectors. So we hope some of this will help. So can I have the next slide? Jaden's going to click it for me. Yeah. Thank you. So the first issue was around coverage. This really helped the health sector work out, were the interventions that they knew worked reaching the right number of people? And this is just sort of very basic to get a feel of the scale of the problem. Because we know there are justice gaps, but the next stage is, well, what about the services that are going to fill that justice gaps? How are we doing in getting to that point? So on this slide, what we show is the number of justice problems that are so severe they need legal advice and assistance. And we're using World Justice Project data here to give us a baseline. And I don't know if you can see really quite at the bottom, but on the right-hand side, we've only got 40%. And in the middle point is 20, and you don't need to adjust your eyes, but Canada, you're there at the top, and we think you're about 5, which is about, if it's any comfort, as bad as many other countries is. But we think there's about 10 million, the legal needs surveys tell us there's something like 10 million legal problems in Canada a year that need legal advice and assistance. Legal aid, 200,000. Community legal clinics, maybe 300,000. Net total, only 5%. Now, if this were the health sector or any other sector, they would be saying, this is appalling, we need to be changing this. But the health sector used this. When they realized vaccination rates were as low as 20%, they said, we need to shift these to 80%. And they then made a major plan. So just knowing how big this problem is was a key part of the change. Next idea, unit costs. Some of you may have heard of BRAC. Some of you may have not. It is the largest NGO in the entire world, based in Bangladesh. And the founder came out with this great quote, small is beautiful, but scale is necessary. So one of the things we're seeing in many sectors is there are lots of small-scale pilot experiments, but they need to be taken to scale. And only when they're taken to scale do the unit costs start tumbling down and does the intervention become affordable. So I've just drawn here, the first figure is the costs of civil legal aid plans in Canada. Average cost is $2,500. Cost of community service worker models is about $600. That's the rate probably for the Ontario community legal clinics, average cost there. But what I think is the potential game changer, and this is where I'll be updating my slide in real time, ideally, is the unit cost of $3. Unit cost of $3 is what the People Law School in British Columbia are achieving for their new AI model that's providing information and guidance to people about how to navigate their way through. Now, obviously, they're dealing with different cases, but the key issue is to find what is the most cost-effective intervention that we're trying to do to solve a particular problem. And we know that lawyers aren't needed to meet most everyday legal needs. Maybe 70% of these can be solved by non-lawyers if we structure the services right. But the question is then finding the right services that match it, and understanding and measuring unit costs, and then working out what was the most cost-effective way of doing it was really important, because just throwing more money at the existing system is not necessarily the way that's going to get to scale. And certainly when we're needing coverage to shift from 5% to 80%, it's probably going to take a different approach to be able to achieve that. So thinking about unit costs. Third lesson is getting a balance of your spending right. One of the big things that happened in the health sector was they realized they weren't spending enough money on primary healthcare. And over about 40 years, there's been a global trend that's resulted in most countries spending 1/3 of their budgets on primary healthcare. So it wasn't an increase in health spending, it was a reallocation within health spending as to where to put the money. So we've been doing some work with the Hague Institute for Innovation of Law that some of you may know of, and also Pathfinders to Justice. And we were commissioned by the Justice Action Coalition, which is a group of 20 countries. Canada is a very active participant in this globally, who wanted to say, what is some of the financial advice or guidance you can give countries that want to move to a more people-centered justice arrangement? I can talk about and share that if you want to know that in more detail, but just one highlight figure. We reckon that in order to meet 50% of everyday legal needs, a typical country needs to be spending just 2.5% of its justice budget on frontline justice services. Now, the frontline justice services are the ones you recognize. That's information, advice, and assistance. And when I say 2.5% of the justice budget, I'm using a definition that the OECD would use that would include correctional services, police, prisons. So it's quite a large budget. It's not just the Department of Justice's budget. But nonetheless, it's much, much smaller than primary health. 2.5% is a relatively small sum. And particularly if you think this is something you're going to get to over 5-10 years, it's something that one can slowly grow up to and make. So for us, the surprise was this is actually a relatively low number. If it was 30%, then trying to get that kind of shift is very, very difficult. And then fourth slide. Issue about investing in data and evidence. Well, I'm sure you've heard a lot about that today and the last few days, and it's just been great to see how much has been going on. On health, there was much, much more than is being done in the justice sector. A key study in '85 done by Rockefeller was good health at low cost. Which countries in the world were achieving amazing health outcomes for relatively low cost? That really started to help people to change. And then the World Bank did a paper which was about not merely making the case for investing in health, but how to do it. What are the most cost-effective ways? And then there's a whole series of interventions about what are the diseases we need to do and what are the most cost-effective ways of doing that. Compared to that, the justice sector is only just beginning to do this kind of analysis. So there's a lot being done, but a lot further to go. And one of the reasons is the funding isn't there. So this shows the relative funding for justice, health, and education. So it's a proportion of that sector's budget that is being spent on research and development. Now, health is maybe a special case because of all the scientific stuff that's going on. But in education, 0.5% of the education budget goes on research and development. In justice, the average is only 0.1. Now, it just gives an idea that maybe part of the problem we're struggling with is just being really serious about the level of investment. If you want to change things at scale, then there's a lot of financial work that needs to be done to go about that, and that needs to be backed by really good financial evidence. And I think the justice sector is just at that beginning of that kind of process. Thank you. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Marcus, and hopefully that is a helpful overview in terms of levels of funding, how to scale, how to prioritize, and where to put data and evidence. Now what we're going to do, we're going to transition to a second phase to really now see, well, what's actually happening in terms of funding for justice with three, I think, very complementary and important funders in the Canadian context. And so we're going to go, I guess we'll just go down the line. We'll start with Josh. And we've just put it for opening remarks. Each funder introduce their organization, the mandate, priorities, what you fund, how you fund, and why. And if you want to say a bit about who you are, this is Josh Patterson, who's Executive Director of the BC Law Foundation. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci. It's great to be here today. Most people in the room probably know, so I won't dwell on the nature of law foundations. We are independent philanthropic foundations that use the interest on lawyers' pooled trust accounts and turn that revenue towards our statutory purposes, which generally across the country in all 13 provinces and territories, every 50 state of the Union in the United States, are legal aid, legal research, legal education, and so forth. But we all do that in kind of different ways according to our different jurisdictions. One thing that makes BC kind of unique relative to all the other 13 ones in Canada is that unlike in most other provinces and territories, we're actually a direct funder of a significant portion of BC's civil legal aid infrastructure. After our provincial government cut all legal clinics, zeroed them out in the early 2000s. It was the Law Foundation, long before my time, that tried to step in and try to rebuild a reasonable hand-drawn facsimile of some of what had been there before. Over time, that's built up to 126 frontline community legal advocates in more than 50 communities, 24 legal clinics with staff lawyers, and these days about 60% of our annual funding, over $50 million a year, goes to that. In addition, at our foundation, we've got some other really interesting things we're working on. We spend a lot of time and energy on Indigenous justice revitalization, following the priorities of Indigenous communities themselves, both funding in Indigenous legal orders, but also funding in the Canadian system, programs to assist Indigenous folks who are caught up in the Canadian system. And that includes some pretty big grants, like $15 million to the BC First Nations Justice Council, which amazing, interesting story where they're building effectively a parallel legal aid system specialized for Indigenous folks. But altogether, in the past, well, I guess by the end of this year, we think we will have spent about $93 million on Indigenous justice from in the last 3 years on both Indigenous legal orders and in the Canadian system. Besides that, we have a strong program in racial justice. So for decades in BC, there had never been any services created, unlike some people may be familiar with in Ontario or other jurisdictions, that were created by and for different communities, different cultural communities and racialized communities, specialized clinics and so forth. So over the last few years, we've spent about $25 million on building up that program in British Columbia. And beyond that, we also have funding for access to justice generally and all kinds of different interesting projects to advance system transformation and so forth. The thing that I'll say about that is I know we talk a lot about innovation. We took care, and this was just our choice, not to overemphasize novelty or innovation. Innovation and novelty was great, but we'd heard a lot from community groups that it's tough for them when funders want them to innovate. Sometimes they just wanted to strengthen something completely non-innovative, but that worked. And so we made very clear that was part of our priority as well. So just a little tour of some of what we're up to these days.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Sorello, and I have the honor of being the CEO of the Law Foundation of Ontario. I want to thank the organizers today. This has been an incredible 2 days of conversation. It's been great to meet so many people working in different ways to advance access to justice across the country. And I've certainly come away full of ideas for things that we might do at the Foundation. So thank you very much to the National Action Committee and to all of you for a great conference. So as Josh said, I'm sure this audience is familiar with what law foundations are and the kinds of work they do. I am aware that we have people from across the country here. So I will say all of your law foundations will have as their statutory objects support for legal education, support for legal aid, and support for law libraries, and support for legal research. But beyond that, there are some differences. In Ontario, ours, the one big difference we have is that we have a separate segregated fund that supports class action work, so support for public interest class action litigation. So that's one thing that makes us different. So across our programs, we support hundreds of grantees. We turned 50 a year and a half ago. And we had a celebration for that. And we had a law student who went and did a lot of research on the history of the foundation. And we sort of added up our granting over the years. And what we found is as of our 50th anniversary, across the funding that we provide to Legal Aid Ontario, the funding we do through grants and through class action litigation, the foundation has distributed over $2 billion to advance access to justice in Ontario. So it's pretty remarkable. Yeah. And I should say, we're the funder, but I just want to acknowledge that across these 2 days, I've heard so many organizations talking about the work they actually do. We have the privilege of funding some of that work, so it's been particularly fun to hear those of you who we have a small hand in supporting talk about your work on the front lines. But amazing work going on across the country. And again, our role is to lift up and support and enable that work, but really hats off to all of you who are actually doing the work. So I mentioned the Class Proceedings Fund. That's one thing that we have that's unique to Ontario. The other thing that's unique to Ontario is that by statute, 75% of the revenues we receive from lawyers and paralegals' mixed trust accounts flows through us automatically to Legal Aid Ontario to support critical frontline legal services. We have the biggest statutory contribution in the country, and we're very proud of being able to provide that level of support to what is now Legal Aid Ontario. It's changed a bit over the years, but to support their work across various different service modalities. We also uniquely have a national access to justice funding stream called our Access to Justice Fund. So like most law foundations, and again, those of you in the room who work with us will know this, we're generally restricted to funding work that is in support of the people in our province. Doesn't mean we can't support national organizations, but when you apply to us for funding, you have to talk about how they're going to benefit, in our case, Ontarians. But about, let me think, 15 years ago now, we received a very large SciPray award. So that's an award in a class proceedings action. I'm not going to give a lecture on class proceedings because it's not relevant, but a $14 million award that wasn't our IOLTA revenue, right? Wasn't interest on mixed trust accounts. So isn't caught by that statutory contribution and doesn't have to benefit Ontarians. So our board at the time made the decision to set up a national funding stream called our Access to Justice Fund. Since that first award, we have been very fortunate to receive a number of other SciPray awards, and we set that money aside and we use that money to support national granting initiatives. So we're really, really pleased to be able to do that, and that's something unique about us. I could go on and talk about the foundation forever, but I'm going to pass it over to Tim. I think you're going to talk about SSHRC now.
Thanks, Lisa. My name's Tim Wilson. I'm the Associate Vice President of Research Programs at the Social Sciences Humanities Research Council, so SSHRC. The slide there has Sylvie Lamoureux. That is not me. She sends her regrets. She's the head of the agency, interim head of the agency, and couldn't be here today. So a little bit about SSHRC. For those of you who don't know, we're the primary national funder of research in social sciences and humanities in Canada. We fund law and justice research regularly, annually on average. I had the data folks do a run, and annually on average, we would fund about 320 grants or scholarships in the law and justice field, valuing over $14 million per year. And we have three main programs that we fund those through. So we fund talent, so master's and doctoral scholarships, as well as postdoctoral fellowships. We have our Insight program, which funds investigator-led research, primarily university professors who are applying to these grants. And we have a partnership stream of programs that fund partnered research between academics and actors in other sectors, whether it's the not-for-profit, government, or other institutions internationally. So access to justice, when I see it interface with our agency, access to justice, I don't have to tell you, it seems to me it's really all about people. And that's what social sciences and humanities are about. So we see it across all of our disciplines, in addition to the numbers I gave you just on law and justice. In addition to that primary funding of the actual research, we fund, let's say, the valorization of research successes that are innovative. We have what we call our Impact Awards. That's a big ceremony every year. And 2023, David Deisenhouse of the University of Toronto won our gold medal, our highest award for his innovative work on access to law and justice. And then the year after that, our highest partnership award was awarded to Pierre Noreau, who was just presenting here in the previous session from the University of Montreal for his work on access to justice. So this community is well represented in terms of where we're valorizing. A couple of other, let's say, priority initiatives that I would signal that are happening at the at the Social Sciences Humanities Research Council are our Indigenous research strategy that we're undertaking with the other two funding councils, the Health Research Council and NSERC, the National Sciences and Engineering Research Council. So through that strategy, we've developed Indigenous research guidelines that help us to undertake appropriate research for appropriate peer review of Indigenous research proposals. We've also received time-limited funding through Budget 2024 for significant investment in Indigenous research capacity and reconciliation. And these are tri-agency network grants that we're administering on behalf of the three agencies. We also have ongoing funding for Black scholars at the master's, doctoral, and postdoctoral fellows level that we've had since 2022, and that's really moving the needle on the pipeline for Black scholars in all the disciplines. And then the final thing I'll underscore in terms of the cultural shift with the community, so that the academic community doesn't feel hamstrung by, let's say, the normal incentives of the academic mill, let's say. The tri-agency has signed on to the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. So this is funders and other stakeholders getting together to say, when we're assessing the value of research so that we can fund it, or if you're a university, whether that scholar should be advanced for promotion and tenure, let's not just look at the impact factor of the journal. Let's try to look at other research contributions. So the agencies have signed on to that, have ensured that our research processes and assessment criteria are in line with that, and are stepwise implementing a tri-agency narrative CV as a way of concretely implementing that, a CV that allows the description of different types of research outputs, not just a list of peer-reviewed publications. Like Lisa, I could go on, but I'll stop there, and happy to have more of a discussion later.
Thanks a lot, Tim. So now we have a sense of what's there in terms of different funding models. And so now we're going to turn just a couple of questions to the panelists, actually, to give them a chance to go in more detail. And so first to Lisa and Josh on the Law Foundation side is just to please reflect a bit more on what are some of the opportunities and constraints you see in your current funding of access to justice. So in brief, what's working well? What do you wish you could do more of?
Thanks. I thought Lisa was going to be talking first, so I have a note here that says, adopt Lisa's constraints. So I'm going to leave her. So in advance, I agree with what Lisa says. I've thought of a few other constraints, though. And one of them is that, and this is obvious, and it's a constraint for everyone, the need far exceeds available funding. And if you cast your mind back to my introduction, I talked about we're funding some things that we've always funded and trying to fund those things more robustly. And then we're funding new things. And when Lisa will talk about how some of the financial constraints that law foundations face, but there's always, and governments face this too, there's a tension between being able to invest in and sustain essential services that we are funding and our core funders for, and then trying to invest in new approaches, and then thinking ahead to what happens if on the time when the money isn't as good, and then how do we think of how to prioritize among those things, because we don't want to just wind up prioritizing automatically the work that's always been done and bake in and crystallize whatever the priorities were 20 years ago, because they have some seniority or longevity. Government defunding is a big challenge for us. We're constantly being asked to pick up the pieces when organizations come to us and say, the feds cut this money. This is an amazing program. We don't want to see it go. Often, and we work closely with government, though we're independent. We know that the folks in the ministries of Attorney General earnestly want these things to be able to continue, and often we hear it's coming from Treasury Board and other places, but nevertheless, the Crown walks away, and there's a lot of challenge for us. How much can we take on and try to hold that bag? What's working really well? Long-term flexible funding is something that law foundations and many philanthropic organizations are trying to do a lot better at, making sure that it's not the year after year, just single year funding, or there's a diagram, I don't have a diagram, but like top hat funding, which is the line goes like this, funded, and then drops down. And if for those of you who aren't sighted, I described the shape of a top hat, going up, being flat, then coming down. That is, being able to do longer term flexible funding has been really great, including being able to invest more in earlier stage and less structured things that are perhaps a little more risky, where things aren't as immediately measurable. Having a board in place that goes along with you for the ride on like, maybe we're not going to be showing like the metrics that you're imagining, speaking of data, in year 1 and year 2. And that won't mean it's failed. It will mean that it's emerging.
Okay, I adopt all of Josh's constraints because we feel them as well. But I guess the ones that I had on, some of the ones that I had on my list is number one, and again, this won't be a surprise, but is the volatility of the funding, which I was in the grantee world before I joined the Law Foundation. I had some sense of, but the past 5 years, which is as long as I've been at the foundation, are a prime example. We've had like the agonies and the ecstasies of funding, and that makes it really difficult, as Josh said, to not just think about how to continue to support the organizations that have relied for many, many decades on funding from law foundations, but also how to support new and emerging initiatives. Thankfully, the sun has shined for the last few years. So I would just, and I'm sure everyone in the audience knows this is a good time to be talking to law foundations generally about funding. But I think for all of us, we've when we come together, we talk about, okay, this is also a golden opportunity for us as foundations to think about how to sort of restructure and plan programmatically to put funds aside so that we can ensure stable funding for many grantees for years to come. So volatility of funding, I would say, is the number one challenge that we all face. Beyond that, we're quasi-public funders. And so we have a heightened sense of responsibility and accountability. And related to that, we have a lot of stakeholders who look to the way that we do our work and often feel that they should have a voice. And sometimes a strong voice in the way that we work, or the way that we fund, or who we choose to fund, or how we choose to fund. So when we think about our important partnerships and stakeholder relationships, those are our law societies, licensees across our provinces. Law schools are important partners. Government's an important partner. We all have individual relationships and agreements with each financial institution in the province. Those are a lot of stakeholders' relationships to maintain and keep happy. And then, of course, our remarkable grantee organization. So lots and lots of stakeholders that we need to be continually in contact with, nurturing relationships with, and bringing them along as our organizations evolve. Things we want to do more of are things that are going really well. Well, there's so many, but I'll try and just lift up a few. So I think primarily, I think about the golden opportunity of the last few years. It's a sort of serendipitous, the fact that our revenues went up at the same time as our foundation's been really thinking about what actually does justice mean? Like, what does it really mean? And so I loved that we started this conference with a statement that justice is, for the common good. It represents the common good. Justice is well-being for all. How do people have access to a just life? And that is much, much broader than just access to legal services, right? Or a legal system. So for many, many years, in the early decades of the foundation, we funded pretty traditional work, foursquare in the legal system. But in recent years, with the support of our magnificent board and the ability to do more because of the increase in our revenues, we've been able to broaden our conception and broaden the box of the kind of work that we feel we as a law society should support. And that's been a really, really exciting opportunity. We've also begun doing funded partnerships with other foundations. So we have tried for many years to increase funding to certain communities who have traditionally been underfunded by foundations across the board, not just law foundations. And although we continue to work to establish and nurture relationships with, particularly northern and rural and remote communities, Indigenous communities, racialized communities, we've also started actually entering into funded partnerships with philanthropic organizations in those communities and giving them the money to give out because they have the direct connections with community. They have relationships of trust. And working with them allows us to flow money in a way much quicker and much more efficiently and to a much broader group of grantees than we can reach on our own, at least at this particular time. So we've done in the last few years funded partnerships with the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund, with the Black Opportunities Fund, with the Communities Foundations Fund. Again, it's a way of broadening the groups that we can support. And then very lastly, I'll say we really leaned into convening in the last few years, and that's been remarkable. So some of this is convening that we do. We bring people together and have conversations like the ones we've been having the last 2 days, but also just support for our grantees to do that, because we know they really they have so much that they could learn from each other and contribute to each other's work. Again, going back to the sense of like holistic service delivery, they need support to come together, and we're really pleased to be able to do that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Lisa and Josh. And I did say Lisa first and then Josh, so in terms of order there. For Tim, we're going to shift gears a bit more, because we've heard sort of more from inside the sector and the system, and as SSHRC, you have I think the real luxury and privilege to look across many different fields. And so we saw the graph, and we've heard a lot over the last couple of days that justice lags other fields and has to compete with them for scarce resources. So as a funder that works across multiple fields of study and policy, what guidance or ideas might you have for the justice sector to make the case better for funding, or to think about new ways of funding?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would say first of all, when it comes to justice and law research funding at our agency, it's not lagging. So if you submit proposals for research funding in law or whatever aspect of law, the success rate, the funding rate for that proposal is the same as any other discipline. We ensure that through the distribution of funds. There can be perceptions in certain disciplines that they're lagging behind other disciplines because of, let's say, there's myth busting that needs to be done, that type of thing. The other thing I'll note in terms of the research funding landscape is that at the federal level, there has been a win for this community already. There's a couple of huge wins. Okay, so in budget 2025, the federal budget, there was an announcement of 15% cuts across all of our funding, and it led probably in a lot of areas to the types of things that Josh was mentioning, that provinces are scrambling to try to find out what to do. Luckily, for funding of research across all the disciplines, we were limited to a 2% reduction in line with other areas such as defense that are priorities for new investment. So the 2% reduction is lower than the 15%, obviously, but it was also accompanied with $1.7 billion investment in talent attraction, so international talent attraction, including in social sciences, humanities disciplines. So institutions across the country are going to get the best and the brightest, and make sure that they're getting the best and the brightest in your fields as well. So all that to say, when you couple that with investments from the previous budget that are ramping up over time, there's actually more money for legal and justice research in the system year after year for the next 3 years than there was this year. It's not going down, it's going up in terms of the amount of funding at the federal level for research. However, what we're also seeing is just over the last 2 or 3 years, an 80 to 90% increase in the applications we're getting for funding. So the demand is increasing at such a pace that success rates, what you might see on the ground as well, my success rate or the proposals, I don't seem to be getting as successful as frequently. The success rates are staying the same or maybe dipping slightly. In terms of the general question of putting forward, so that's at the research level, and it doesn't speak to what Marcus was mentioning in terms of other facets of the justice system. In terms of getting the community together, I think it's about seizing on a couple of the key priorities of the government today. So right now, I think I would seize on justice, contribution to community resilience, these types of things. Can we get the the stakeholder community that are lobbying for increases in funding to get on the same page. You know your community better than I do. I'll most often be dealing with university community, and even there, it seems like they should be on the same page. We all want more money for the universities, but often there can be a fragmented landscape on how we're asking for that money. So I would try to get together on the same page with the lobbying groups that you're dealing with in your community and try to put it on the hook of one of those federal priorities.
Great, thanks. And so now to put out, especially to Julie, sorry, that's Tim. So, okay. To all the panelists, to Lisa, Josh, Tim, and we'll get back to Marcus on the next question, is really then this question of research, data, and evidence, and how does it fit into your funding of justice? And I think that's primarily for, especially the law foundations, how does it fit into what you fund, but also how does it guide funding decisions at all, and any good examples you'd want to highlight along those lines? And let's go to Lisa first this time. So, thanks.
Okay, thanks. So first of all, I would just say legal research is one of our statutory objects. So we have funded legal research from day one when the foundation first started flowing grants. For many years, that was primarily through the comprehensive grants that we give to all of the Ontario law schools every year. But more recently, we have a multi-year core funding granting program that includes a number of research organizations like the Law Commission of Ontario. I was here at one point, Law Commission of Ontario, Canadian Forum for Civil Justice, the Osgood Society for Legal History. We've done specialty calls for proposals specifically on research agendas, so things like tech, measuring impact. We've commissioned research occasionally, so I know Julie Matthews is in the room and all of her incredible work on trusted help. Julie, over there. And then through a number of sort of shorter-term grant programs, like our Responsive program, we constantly get brilliant applications for multidisciplinary research projects that we've been proud to support on things like work to reclaim Indigenous legal orders, looking at COVID interventions and public health, looking at how to develop evidence-based approaches to determinations in child welfare proceedings. So lots of support for research generally. But I would say we're also trying to expand our understanding of what the foundation understands to be legal research. So there's the traditional academic research, but in recent years we've been reflecting that in some ways every application for funding from us includes research. So by that I mean when you apply to funding for the foundation, particularly through our Responsive granting program, applicants are being asked to sort of map the landscape of what the legal issue is that they're wanting to address, what services or players are already in the field, what resources exist, what are the priorities, and why they're best placed to receive, why they're best placed to meet whatever gap has been addressed. And we rely on them, quite frankly, to do that as part of their granting application. Now, I will say, and this is a bit new, you can apply for funding to do that work from us, because we understand that takes work. And so just to get to and we'd rather you do it in stages and do that development work and be paid for that development work, so that when you come to propose an actual program, it's a program that's grounded in that background. We're also, I mentioned that we're doing more convening. And so what we're really, and this is not rocket science, and I'm sure it's completely obvious to everybody in the room, but we're really learning that research happens, learning happens, data comes through conversations and consultations and through that convening work. It comes from sitting in a sharing circle or a listening circle, and all of that data and all of that research informs the work that we do and is of benefit to everybody in the room. So we're really trying to think more broadly of what we conceive of as legal research.
Thanks very much. I mean, just to echo, in our own work, the convening side, we find not only it generates new sources of knowledge, but better capacity knowledge transfer. And even in a time of kind of declining rule of law, a sense of solidarity among groups, which we didn't expect and was really, I think, welcome for everyone to hear and see. So, Josh, please.
Thanks. You know, we as law foundations learn a lot from each other. And so there's, as Lisa was talking, there was things that we've literally copied, like we're just looking over their shoulder, copying their homework. And I think it goes both ways, like where we share good ideas among each other. So for example, the idea of giving grantees money to actually just do the research for their project first, before we expect them to do all the work. We've wholesale copied that from the Law Foundation of Ontario, and we've been grateful to be able to do that too. We are not, there's a lot of work for us to do and all foundations to do on this. And so I'm not sitting here today to say, oh man, like our practices on all of this are like just the best ever. There's lots of work. We're always trying to improve. We're spending a whole summer and the fall thinking about the metrics that we collect and the differences between agencies and how they interpret our metrics and what actually we want to track. So all of that kind of stuff we're thinking about a lot. But stepping away from that sort of like corporate foundation approach to what we're collecting, something that we're investing in a lot and thinking again about what Lisa was saying and Adrian was saying about the community-based collaborations around research. We've invested in, at the very early stages, in a cohort learning program where we've actually, we're engaging certain grantees, not like they've come to us for a grant, but we're almost like contracting with them to be the hubs in different communities in BC for collaborative, peer-based learning about what works in their communities, what the legal needs that are unseen to us are in their communities, to test ideas, to solve problems. They have resources to get together themselves. They can test ideas in real time, learn from each other's approaches. One of them gets more money to be the host and then to be able to put together and consolidate, and they have the responsibility and the time and the staff time to pull that together as well. And this has been focused right now on Indigenous and Black and racialized communities in BC, where traditional in-the-center legal institutions have long had not a great ability and a great transmission, two-way transmission, reciprocal transmission of information. So that's something interesting and new that we're doing, and we can tell you how it went in a few years. We didn't invent this either, by the way. This is a philanthropic approach that comes from other community foundations, largely in the States, look in Philadelphia and Chicago, and different places where this has been tried and done. And we're trying to learn from our peers and other places on that too.
Thank you, Jess. Tim, anything to add on this point? Okay, great. So now we're going to shift the conversation to the last part. On collaboration. So this is to cue to the audience to get ready with your thoughts and suggestions, but we're going to turn first to all the panelists, and I'll leave it open for you to self-organize to who goes first. And so in prepping this panel, actually, we heard from the discussions that, relatively speaking, collaboration among justice funders in Canada is new or limited. And in a sense, we also then, how do you say, décortiquer before? We broke down actually in true legal fashion, what do we mean by collaborative? And there's collaboration in terms of supporting existing collaborations. There's kind of supporting the same group or grantee in parallel, and then actually coming together to support the same thing. And from what I understand, the support to the Action Committee has been a new and novel form of collaboration. So a modest but significant start. But then hearing you speak, Lisa, that you are collaborating with partnerships at community, which was new to me, and I think sounds very compelling as a model. And so then the question is, any reflections on where to start and where greater collaboration could be most useful. What could it look like? How to get there? And just to say, to back up a step, I mean, to me it's self-evident, but in case it's not, I mean, the idea of collaboration is it's strength in numbers. So you can take small bits and hopefully you get economies of scale or sum of the parts. It also allows you to coordinate. I mean, I come from a field where there's so much duplication of funding, and it's unfortunate. But then also the challenges we've been talking about the last 2 days, they're hyper-local and specific to your jurisdiction, community, province, but in a sense, they're common challenges across. And so that's this idea of like how to come together. So any reflections, where to start, what it looks like, how to get there, and over to you then, Tim. Looks like you're ready.
Yeah, I'll start. Just some, as you were posing the questions, some quick ideas, and it may seem obvious, but I think just from in coming in, I didn't know a lot about the law foundations at the provincial level. So I think there's learning to be done at every phase of what funding agencies do in terms of the types of things that Josh was talking about, looking over at each other's shoulders. And I think, for instance, SSHRC as a national funder that's, let's say, broader in terms of disciplinary coverage, at the program design phase, what are the gaps in the system that we could learn from the provincial law foundations? And then probably there's co-learning when it comes to the actual process of peer review, innovative processes of how we define research excellence, these types of things, how we deal with different groups of applicants. And then I think there's probably synergies with respect to knowledge mobilization and ensuring that the funded research is getting to the right communities and has an impact on society. And then finally, I think there's kind of practically co-funding models where what we have explored in the past with other provincial funders, since we can't have one-to-one co-funding with just one province, is that provincial funder will, to save on their own process, fund or add supplements to SSHRC-funded applications. So there's those types of synergies, I think, that could happen, lessons learned, but also right up to co-funding.
Thanks so much, Lisa, Josh. And Marcus, please, if you have.
Thank you. We won't put you through a whole 3 rounds of rock, paper, scissors. Yeah, you know, when we were talking the other day, we were reflecting that collaboration can and has been more limited. And actually, as you sit and think about it, though, it's not as limited as we sort of think, because actually there's quite a lot that goes on. And one thing that we've been experimenting with recently, and interestingly, just on the funder side, but we've involved grantees too. Law Foundation came. It was co-hosted by us and the Circle on Philanthropy and the Real Estate Foundation in BC. There's a real estate foundation in BC, operates similar to us. It's Realtors Trust Accounts. Was a funders shared learning gathering where funders got together and talked about what we're doing wrong, what we're doing right as funders, but grantees were invited and got to talk with us too. Like, we all brought grantees to hear from them what we were doing wrong, which is really unusual in the philanthropic community. It's getting done a bit more now, but it's not that normal that funders want to hear from grantees sitting in the same room all together in a hotel, ballroom with catered lunch. What have we done wrong? So that was really interesting, and we're going to do it again because it was really, really valuable. Following again Law Foundation of Ontario's lead, like we as the Law Foundation, we don't have, there are other foundations that have more expertise with particular communities. So the Black Opportunities Fund's Justice Grants Program and the Foundation for Black Communities, which has a food security and policy program, it's law reform around food security for Black people across Canada, but in BC. And so they're making grants in that area. We're not going to be the ones sitting and deciding which organizations in different communities that we're not that close to as an organization have the best proposals. And so we've given money to them and we're working with them on that. We were joking earlier, if you want to see an example of funder collaboration, well, here you sit. This is actually one of the cardinal examples, as Adrian was mentioning, where we've worked together for like a one-window multi-law foundation application and reporting process. So we're trying it out. We're getting there, and apparently it works because you're all here. But one of the things that's on the burden side, or the difficult side of that, is like, some funders are quite simpatico in terms of like what we expect and want to see and think reporting is. And you may have other ones who they're in a different stage, they have different priorities, perhaps their boards have different priorities, and you can't necessarily get there in the collaboration you want because it turns out that the org is going to have multi-different reports anyways. So partly there's work to be done, and it is being done on the philanthropic side, to try and get our philosophies aligned around what it is that we expect, because that makes collaboration a lot easier. And I don't know much about how SSHRC operates. Certainly across other areas of provincial and federal government, we understand that the requirements are very much more difficult and rigid, and that makes that a difficult collaboration for sure.
I'm really mindful of time, so I won't say much because actually I think this is an area where we really want to hear from the audience about how we can better support your work on data and measurement, but also in particular your collaborative work. And I would say like we picked apart the question because you could come at it from a lot of sides, but we support a lot of collaborative work. Josh's foundation supports a lot of collaborative work. We love it when people bring us applications that involve multiple organizations coming at an issue from many different ways. And we continue to try and challenge ourselves on how to do better, but we're open to hear that from people. I mean, I think across the board, most of the foundations have really leaned into this idea of we're not just legal system funders, but we're funders whose primary motivating sort of impetus is to fund projects that advance access to justice. And I would say that's an evolution over the sort of 30 to 50-year history of the Canadian Law Foundations. I think we're all at different stages in that journey. I know we're all at some of the larger foundations where we have more staff and have the ability to kind of engage more with the broader philanthropic sector. There's so much we can learn from that sector about how to, if not, be formally a trust-based funder, certainly learn from those principles. And we sometimes attempt things and fail, and there's lots of learnings that come from that. I mean, I would share. We've talked so much in the last few days about data and how to measure data and how to measure impact, and we've been working at our foundation for 2+ years now on an impact measurement framework that we still struggle with how to move forward with it. So, and we're learning and hearing from our grantees about how to do that. So. I'm going to stop talking because we'd really love to hear from the audience.
And as soon as you finish it, watch out. Swipe or no swiping, because we're gonna take that impact measurement framework.
We got a good framework. I'll share with you later. Go for it, Mark.
I think in terms of international best practice, a lot of it's already there, happening in Canada at the moment. Particularly, I think the donors and grantees coming together, that's something that lots of people have found as well. Two things might be worth reflecting on. One, just thinking about who is the funding universe. So bringing in philanthropy and bringing in business sometimes has helped in other sectors. I don't know what the context here is. And the other one is also just thinking who the justice system is. I think a lot of people are saying a lot of the justice problems arise because of social security payments and how those are happening. So just thinking, well, who do you want on the other side? When you're thinking about what the problems are, you may want a wider range of institutions at different times. Of course, not every time. You don't want to create an enormous bureaucracy for everything, but just getting that balance right at different points.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret. So we have about 10 minutes, unless, of course, the next session wants us to kind of dip in, but I assume not. So please, what we heard, and Lisa already posted, is that it would be helpful to hear from you how the foundation, especially other funders, what you'd like to see more of, what you want them to know. But then also this question of, same question I just posed. What could collaboration look like? How could it be useful? Where could it start? And so I see your hand. If you could please go to the microphone. In the meantime, I will turn to Andrew. Please pose your question, and thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Pallier, British Columbia Access to Justice Centre of Excellence. I want to thank you for this, and I want to thank, in particular, the Law Foundations for the fundings over the years. This has been such a wonderful past couple of days. There's a flicker. This is the first gathering of this kind of group nationally, and there is a flame that seems to have been lit. My worry as a researcher is that there may not be enough oxygen in the room for that flame to continue. And so I think about this, and I think about Marcus's slide about the different funding for health and justice. And Adrian, your comment the other day about a public justice school, and that doesn't exist, but access to justice is not valorized within many law schools. It is not something that is supported. The structure behind that is not there. Something needs to shift to make that more possible for researchers to imagine careers in this field that are sustainable. An example of how that might look, I'm going to use the American Bar Foundation's example. They were here presenting yesterday. About 10, 15 years ago, Becky Sandifer started a sort of cohort development program of specifically focusing on access to justice research and funding researchers to try things, maybe fail, but to know that they would have stable funding to do access to justice specific research, and that could then be, could seed the beginning of this emergent field. So I just want to offer that, but thank you all for coming together here today.
Thank you very much. Why don't we gather up questions first, and then we can turn for some reflections. Thanks.
Thank you. Mavis Morton, University of Guelph. I just have a comment for Tim about SSHRC. I'm sure you've already heard this, but in terms of design, I find that it is very, very challenging for community partners to participate in the current process. And many times it's just about, ruins the possibility to partner. So this is definitely not a new thing, but there doesn't seem to be much change on the design, and that would be super helpful if you are in fact interested in partners that are not academic ones. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any real reactions, comments?
Well, I'll just say thanks for that feedback right away. I have heard that before, and we have simplified the process for community partners as much as we can in our current process and system. We'll be moving to the new a new grant management system over the next 2 years that will hopefully make that process with the partners even more seamless, and I'd invite feedback after that as well. So thanks again.
I was only going to add that it's not just like law foundations. We had the most immensely legal, dense application processes. It would be, as lawyers, when we were grantees, it was hard to get through, and never mind for members of the broader community, just hopeless. So this is a shift all the way across philanthropy, trying to. So I'm glad that you've raised it, because it's a really, really important point. And we're probably not all the way there yet. We probably think, because we're lawyers, we think, oh, that seems pretty simple. But it may not be there yet.
And I just wanted, it's still on, right? Yeah, I just wanted to respond to what Andrew said. I think that's a really interesting question. So I mentioned we give funding to all the Ontario law schools. They have to use it they have a lot of latitude. In particular, we've just changed up that and dramatically increased that funding stream. They have a lot of money to do pretty much what they want, but it has to be to support advancing access to justice initiatives. And of course, research could be part of that. And then we have a articling fellowship program for articling fellowship placements, articling placements, in public interest. But what you have me thinking is we do a lot to try and support the and this is an area near and dear to my heart because I worked in clinical legal education, running the legal aid clinic at U of T Faculty of Law for many years before joining the foundation. So we've done all this work to think about how to, kind of nurture the next generation of public interest lawyers. I'll just speak for myself. I'm not sure that we've thought about it from the research perspective. So maybe we'll chat after and you'll share some ideas on that front with us.
Okay, good. So we definitely have a chance for at least one more question, please. Thank you.
So what you said about this idea of funding the research component, I think is really super key, because a lot of us are doing the grassroots work and also looking for the funding in order to be able to take it to the next level. And so we're doing that off the side of our desks while also trying to run a practice. And so the idea of being able to do it incrementally, so there's a little piece at a time, and then being able to workshop the ideas, because we often have the sort of germ of the idea and have all sorts of innovative ideas about which people we want to partner with and how to think strategically, and we know how to start the conversation, but don't have the capacity because of our ongoing obligations and our clients and that sort of thing. So I think this is really central to it, to be able to bring to you kind of a half-baked idea or even three-quarters baked, and then be like, this is how we'd like to take it, and just get funding for the next stage. I think that is really central, and especially when you're looking at things like, how do we define justice? I think being able to come, this is the mandate, this is the idea we have, this is the problem, and these are our ideas about the solution, where legal education, legal law reform, legal aid, they're not compartmentalized, they're not siloed, that there's one way of doing all of these things in the same setting. This is how we can envision it, but to have to come and write an entire grant proposal is just daunting while still running your practice.
Yeah, 100%. And often, traditionally, you might have had that grant proposal declined if it was felt like you hadn't done the surveying of the landscape or weren't aware of key partners in the area. But of course, you didn't have the time to do that, right?
Sure.
So, and I know we're going to run out of time, but I do want to just say, like, I'm talking about the foundation, like I do all this work, right? I have the privilege of being the CEO. I work with an incredible team. I just want to call out my colleague over here, Noah Aiken-Clar, who is the director of grants and programs, who is responsible for a lot of the innovation that I'm talking about now, in particular the idea of development grants. So, yeah. Thank you. It's great to hear that that's an idea that resonates. Really.
And my staff aren't here, but I said to my colleagues, so what are we doing on these questions? And they told a lot of it to me, so same. Credit to our team.
Did you want to go?
I can, but if you want to close it down, no problem.
Go ahead. We can squeeze it in, please.
Just thinking about contributing to the research and evidence base, I would hesitate to ask grantors to keep more money to themselves, of course, but the Victoria Law Foundation, for instance, has a pretty well-developed in-house research team, now led by Hugh McDonald, and they've done some very the Pulse reports and that sort of thing. Do you think there's any role for foundations maybe collaboratively sort of supporting research in-house that can lay some of this evidence infrastructure, or bringing together some of the basic information, which then everyone else can then do their sort of focus research on the basis of a sort of a landscape of basic knowledge that the foundations have contributed to, rather than relying upon ad hoc proposals from all over the country. And I know StatsCan's in this space, but just a suggestion or idea.
It's a really interesting one. We see the work that the Australian law foundations are doing. Victoria, I think New South Wales is maybe as a research unit as well. What I can say is we're in the midst of a review of our current research practices and our funding. For many years, it has been just like you described, people bringing in proposals and so on and so forth, and it hasn't. That's good as far as it goes, but it only goes as far as it goes. So it is something we're thinking about. I don't know where we're going to go with it, but looking at Australia is definitely a model that we're curious about.
And I would just say we've done it before. I mentioned Julie's work, which you have worked on as well, on trusted help, and the what was at the time, I think, quite a landmark study connecting across language and region, I think was the report, and looked at, how to meet the public legal education needs of folks who didn't speak English or French as their first language, or who lived in rural and remote locations. So we've done it before. I'd love to see us do it again. We kind of have our hands full with a lot of other things at the moment, but definitely we've got at least one proposal for us that's asking us to do that very thing. So I would say stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Any final reflections? Okay, so we this is like the best managed time for a panel I've had in a long time. I think it has to do with the legal profession, which speaks to the waters I speak in most other days of the year. So it's been a real pleasure. I mean, we did hear we're 40 years behind in some sense in terms of data for access at a global level for on justice, but I think the richness of the discussion is you're hearing at different levels, from really community level to slightly higher up, that there's a lot going on. And I kind of threw that out there at the beginning. The pieces seem to be here, but also a recognition that there needs to be a shift. And I think this is hopefully flows into nicely the next discussion on where to go from here. So again, we sold this as the start of a discussion. I'm hoping there's a few ideas that sparks, and really that's what we've seen over time, the power of here's the nugget of an idea, here's some sources, and really it's to kind of just encourage people as you go forth. After this, the challenge for always great ideas at the conference and in the room, but like the follow through. So this is for everyone, and I have made a few notes to send a few resources after you get back from your travel to really take those 2 or 3 items that you thought that would be great, follow through and see where you can go next. And so the next time you meet for this conference or in the action committee, the conversation is that much farther. So thank you again. It's been a real thrill and pleasure for me to connect with the panelists, and hopefully this was a helpful discussion. And over to the next moderator, and have a great travel back for everyone. Thank you.